Hi, everyone. This is Andrew, host of Pocket Politics, and welcome to episode two, season three. We're in for another great episode with a little bit of a unique twist. We have Audit here, who's going to discuss his new blog post, Understanding Biden's Marijuana Action, up on the Voting Smarter blog, Impartial. To keep up with the Voting Smarter blog, please check out votingsmartersocial.medium.com. The panelists we have here today, you may remember them from the previous episode, are Sarah, Audit, Terry, and of course, myself, Andrew. And then other than Audit's blog post today, we're also going to be looking at what's been going on in Iran with anti-government protests happening across the country in very recent times. So starting off with the first topic of the night, Iran, what's been going on over there is that a 22-year-old woman by the name of Masha Amini died while in custody of Iran's morality police. And for those who don't know, Iran's morality police is the police force in Iran designated to enforce all essentially religious laws within the country, such as hijabs. And when Masha was visiting family in Tehran, her headscarf in the moralities police view was too loose, so they arrested her. And she died in custody under suspicious conditions. Iran is saying that she died with heart failure, whereas her family, along with any others, are saying, well, she was beaten to death by the morality police. And following her death, protests have uprised all across the country, calling for justice for Masha and for more personal, along with more political freedoms as well throughout the country. So turning it over to our panelists, what are your initial thoughts about what's happening in Iran? Do you think these protests are going to die down? And is this the beginning of a new Iranian revolution? Terry, turn it to you, sir.
Well, I think those questions, some of them require seeing the future. And I'm an economist, so I'm very well trained at pretending to see the future, but not usually being right. So when it comes to what's going to be the result of these protests, I don't know. Will they persist? Will they grow into another Iranian revolution? There's a lot of noise in the world right now with bridges blown up in Crimea and missiles hitting Ukraine, inflation, a lot of economic unrest at home in the sort of states that would need to support an Iranian revolution for maybe it to take hold. If you look at the recent tensions between the United States and Saudi Arabia over OPEC's cut of oil production, or they're embracing Putin, or just, the Biden approach to Saudi Arabia is very different than Trump. And so a lot of our usual allies aiming towards an Iranian revolution, towards a more democratic regime, are distracted or not even on Team America right now. And so I don't know if there'll be as much groundwell of support in this sort of tumultuous time worldwide that might need to take, but that also might be a huge plus. The truth is, this revolution is led by women. So the probability of its success is far higher than if it were not led by women, in my opinion. Now, I'm of the belief that women are superior to men, and that's not just because my wife listens to this podcast, because she probably doesn't. And it's because I think that culturally, a lot of patriarchies are shadow matriarchies, right? A lot of cultures are outward facing, where men have control, and there could be something called the morality police. But at home, in the Iranian home, I think, especially in the forward-thinking homes, women have a great deal of power. And the fact that these protests are so widespread and are really mobilizing the youth, right? If you look at how population is growing in that region, the demographics of Iran, it's due for something like this. The only reason I'm not on the bandwagon is saying, heck yeah, this is it. Two reasons. We've seen the Green Revolution. We've seen other unrest and cries for moderation from the regime uh, in the past. So I don't know how suppressive this is going to get. Honestly, I think it's harder for them to take a hard line against women than it is a mixed population when facing the world. So I think that is in this favor. And then the other thing is, I don't understand why we're talking about this now when it's been going on for what, 10, 15 days? Like, I'm actually really surprised and I don't understand. I've talked to a lot of my Iranian colleagues and friends who are really, really upset about how this is covered. Right? For the first time today, I saw a story in the Washington Post about, in my feed about this. And I've been getting all my details from social media, which are always suspect. And there's a bunch of these other foreign news sources cited, but I don't know their veracity or their biases. And so I've been really flabbergasted and dismayed. These are my, I've been SAT prepping by the coverage. I don't like, logically you would think that the American regime is all for regime change in Iran. It's got to be a stated goal inside the State Department, and this would be a great opportunity. So I thought maybe it's so we're not putting our thumb on the scale, and the Iranian regime could say, "Oh, see, look, this is being organized by America," something like that. But then it's led by women looking for equality. The majority of the press I've been decrying over their lack of coverage is left leaning. I've just been really, I don't get it. I don't get why I haven't heard Biden say anything about this. I haven't seen anything about our major female leaders say anything about this. Cultural, past first ladies, current first ladies. Like, I'm just like, where is there was way more coverage of P hats than there was this actual revolution. So I'm gonna stop talking. What do you guys think?
I can go next. Honestly, when we look at a lot of Middle Eastern nations, they are heavily religious. So it's they're very ethno-nationalist nation, and so I think when you have a system that often has a very strict like moral code, I think that often gets broken, like if not willingly or it's done by force. Like America's had strict moral codes before, and we've blown that out of the water, right? We didn't have a violent moral uprising like this, or like a very, like crazy protest, maybe not to this magnitude in quite some time, regarding like the morality of how America's run. But like it's still there. I think if you try to like force a country to like, and its citizens to have like the same exact moral principle for everything, it's going to lead to some like issues. But I also think that like I'm not sure like how popular this movement is in Iran. That's another like I don't know. It seems to be like a reason why maybe a lot of people. I've only seen European leaders comment on this issue, which makes more sense. It's more proximate. They're closer, but I just don't know if like majority of Iranians look at this movement and be like, yeah, this is a positive for progressing or for future Iranian generations. Like I don't think that's the case necessarily, because I think that a lot of people have strong religious values that this movement directly clashes against them, right? And I think if you build a country, you build an entire society around the religious values, and then one day you're like, oh, that's done, and then now you're kind of like, okay, well, what is this country now built on? You have to do this whole another exploration, which is why like I don't know, like I think like just like the Arab Spring calling for democracy, just like the first Arab Spring calling for democracy, I don't know like how successful they will be, but I do think that we're going to be seeing some changes. Like Saudi Arabia now allows women to drive, allows women to have certain privileges that they didn't have 10 years ago. So I do think, I don't know if it's going to lead to, let's say, a democratic endpoint, but I think it will have some major social changes that it will still be a religious dominated society, but it will be a more progressive one.
Sarah, go ahead. I know you're as the woman here on this podcast. I imagine you'll have a very unique and interesting take. So I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope something big happens from it. Again, it's not really being covered that much in our media. I like Terry said, I think Audit also agreed and said this. I really only hear about it in foreign news outlets. And it'll be things like Al Jazeera or, fairly credible sources. But in terms of the popularity of it, because we don't have too many sources, there's questionability about it, but I think it is popular. Because I know the younger generation of Iranians, they're already more liberal, progressive leaning anyway. So I feel like this could be just another reason to kind of rally them up, because I know there's been instability. Like they've been having a lot of regime change, not a lot, but like as far as ideology goes, their current leader's more conservative than the previous one, and I think that was like a lashing out, I guess, of the older conservative types. But going back to the question of like religion and government or morality and whatnot, I think for a lot of Iranians, they might be in a tough spot where they want women to have more rights and they are upset about what happened. But because so much of their legitimacy is tied to being like a religious state, like if you look at the whole like revolution, it was all religious. And before that, it was just like, American kind of Western puppets we had kind of put in. Not to say that that's what's going to happen again, but I guess if you are looking at some of your past regimes and it's, well, Shah, and then it's, oh, well, we had a revolution, it put in a lot of oppressive religious, that still gives them, I guess, the sense of identity and state legitimacy. So undoing that, I guess, is kind of tricky. It's kind of difficult to have a democratic state that is also very like institutionally religious, because they don't go together. It's kind of impossible, to be completely honest. I think a state can have a religious undertone, but as far as something that is strictly institutionalized, it cannot happen. They're just too much at odds, because there's too much going on in ways that people interpret and act on religion. And it's such a personal issue. To politicize it and use it as a means to governing is bound for chaos. And then why it's not being covered in the American news. For one, we are kind of on rocky terms with Iran, Middle East in general. For two, America is in one way or another kind of having their own issues with women's rights. Depending on how you look at the Dobbs case, that's a whole nother discussion we don't need to have right now. But some people will argue that that is a limit on women's freedom. Other people do not. So I don't think they're the same magnitude. But I think if you're just looking at the general principle of women arguably losing a right that some people think is a constitutional right, and then you compare that to what happens, I think it puts America in a tough position, and they might not necessarily be ready to take a stand.
Great, thank you, Sarah, for that. So looking at what I see over there, I do think these protests are going to survive, and the reason why I say that is no matter where you are in Iran, you're seeing the same thing on, I think, a very large scale. I am yet to see this kind of like two sides thing where we have a major group of citizens who are totally against this. If we take a look at, let's say, the Black Lives Matter protest here in the U.S., especially with George Floyd, there was a clear definition of other individuals in this country who had a much different take. You would see protesters clashing of Blue Lives Matter and a Black Lives Matter, two separate groups. Whereas in Iran, based on the coverage I've seen, I haven't necessarily seen anything like that very similar. The only ones I've seen from the coverage who are against what the protesters are fighting for are Iranians, law enforcement. And I think we're also seeing it from, and just remember, Iran's a very young population. So like Sarah, as you were mentioned before, a lot of them more progressive, trying to bring into a more young Gen Z 2022 system of government. The median age in Iran right now is about 32 years old. It's a young country in terms of population, and I think naturally you're going to see young people push for more young reforms. Because let's take a look at what Iran is compared to a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. A lot of those other countries in that region, some of them are not necessarily the most stable, as we see in Syria at the moment, or even Iraq for that matter. Iran is. They have a fairly stable government. They're very stable at governing their country. It's secure. So they don't have really a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess troubles going on. However, they're also not necessarily closed off like North Korea is. So a lot of the young people there see what's happening in the West. They see what's happening in countries that are near them, such as Israel and even Saudi Arabia, for that matter. So they know what other freedoms are out there. They know those Western ideas, and it's possible that those individuals want those ideas in their country. You know, I did see a video clip. It was all these Iranian schoolgirls, and they were giving the finger to the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, and they basically kicked out an education official. So from what I've seen, it doesn't matter really how young they are. And again, these are minors, and I imagine some of them have probably got some conservative parents at home. They're not afraid of ripping the hijab off and showing that we're not going to take this anymore. So will this be like 79, where we have a new Iranian revolution, a new system of government? I think it's too early to determine that, but I would not be shocked if that's something we see in the future.
I have a question for the panel. Let's assume that there would be a new revolution. Do you think that it would be the same like it would be in 79, where you have a lot of chaos and instability and potentially some intervention to set up some sort of democracy? Or do you think that like Iran will be able to be like, oh no, let's, peacefully transition away from a theocracy and implement some more democratic reforms?
I think it's going to be violent if there is one. It's too ingrained in their culture to be fixed or remedied with just like little institutional reforms and bargaining. I think if something's going to happen, and considering like what this is starting over, if something happens, I think it's going to be big and kind of violent, and will most likely need or draw some sort of intervention. The question is just who's going to support it.
I don't know. As the only panelist that was alive in 79, I mean, I was a baby, but the optimist in me wants to disagree with Sarah, right? It wants to believe in people, and it wants me to say that, look, certainly the education system in Iran is very, very good, right? There's some smart people on both sides of this issue. And it's not, I don't know how much of the theocracy in Iran is really about the theocracy, or if it's about power over others. I'm not an expert in this space. I know human nature, but, and so if it's about power, there are off-ramps for those in power where institutional reform could keep them in power in a different way, and we could avert violence. So again, I think it's a lot harder to run over a woman in a tank. Just do it. That picture to the world is just different, and especially like a 16-year-old girl, right? And so they have a little bit of leverage there. If Iran cares about what the world says, right? It could go full Myanmar and not. So, I don't know. I wish I did. What I wanted to say earlier is for context, right? The median age in the United States is 38, right? So if it's 32 in Iran, it's a much younger population than it is here. And I don't know what life expectancy is in Iran versus the United States, but I don't think Krispy Kreme is in Tehran. So I'm guessing it's very similar, if not better. Plus, you're not allowed to drink, right? So you would think they'd live forever. Yeah, look, the future telling stuff, I'm not up for. I'm not going to get it right. But I do think that if we can get more footage out of Iran, and we're starting to, it's not like Tahrir Square where, you know, the camera crews could get in to Egypt. And so I think that's going to be powerful. Something Sarah said earlier caught my mind. Two things. One is I wonder how many editors have nixed articles equating Dobbs to a Jobs in this. Like, how many times have like people been pitching, oh, it's women's right, you know, like the core, you're trying to put those together in an article. But I'm really surprised we haven't seen it. Because that's
going to. I mean, maybe when it gets a little more popular, but also considering we do have another Supreme Court session coming up. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too into it, but I did have a question. Because we don't know future stuff. We can only speculate and guess and hypothesize. But you did bring up a point about if it's about power, but maybe not necessarily for Iran, but just the hypothetical in general, using Iran as the basis. Do you think, though, say the people, the women who are rising up, do you think they would want to keep such a system intact? Not necessarily speaking for Iran, because we can't future predict. I just kind of want to use that as a jumping off point,
Sure.
I guess, to get at like a question of theory, power, legitimacy, et cetera, et cetera.
so.
For anyone.
You said something right, that a free society, it's really hard to be based around religion, because the construct of having a religion as the backbone of a society could negate freedoms. So it depends on that religion, right? If that religion's Buddhism, right? Do your best versus we're going to chop your hands off if you steal, right? And so it depends on the rigidity of the religion that is the backbone of the country.
I feel like all religions are pretty rigid. Like even if you're looking at religious like texts from like Taoist religious texts or Buddhist or Hindus, it's still pretty rigid. There's still rules you have to follow. Like in America, nobody does, because not to the T, right? But definitely in other countries where they're more religious, yeah, there's always rules in religion that people follow, and I think it would still take away some freedoms. But I wanted to like talk about like Sarah's thing about like what does the post protest world look like? And I think that when you look at countries that have had revolutions or changes of face, I like to look at countries like Venezuela, Iran, or these countries that have like seen a massive political change. And it's like, if the ideology is strong in that nation, it will normally persist. So like, let's say, I think Venezuela is a great example. Like when Hugo Chavez came into power, they were a major socialist state, and they had a major crisis, and it became socialist after, but it had a change in face. So I still think like Iran will still be a very religious society, but you'll still have the structures of religious society, but maybe like the face will change. I really doubt that you're going to see such a radical transformation, because that's super rare in a society to have like.
So I hear you, and I'm not sure about the Venezuela argument, because it wasn't socialist before Chavez, and it's still socialist today. So are you talking pre-Chavez now?
So it was, they
Chavez
had a
to Maduro.
capitalist system, and it was
Right.
Hugo Chavez. They were socialist, and then Chavez was assassinated. A lot of political instability, and they were like, "Oh no, what's going to happen next? What does Venezuela look like?" Maduro steps into power, and they become socialist. And I think now you're looking at this new like Guaido, who is like the opposition to Maduro, and he's like, he also seems socialist. It's like, we're gonna overthrow Maduro, but like we're gonna still be socialist because that's the national identity. That is like everyone is like everyone has that same sort of like backbone that they're not willing to give up, regardless of who's in power.
So this could work in your Venezuela example or your Iran example. There are socialist states and there are democratic socialist states. Socialism is a spectrum, and if you ask a third of America, we're socialist already, right? And so socialism itself is about government providing for its people. We all know Muslims, right? And we all know that we have Muslim friends who wear the hijab, women who wear the hijab. We have Muslim friends who do not. We may even have Muslim friends who wear burqas, right? And so there is a spectrum of rigidity that is enforced by the state in different predominantly Muslim countries. We don't have to have, not every Muslim state has the morality police enforcing the law as rigid as Iran. And so, and I'm certainly not a scholar on Islam, but I could see that there is freedom to practice a looser version of Islam, right? If it's about if it's a backbone of Iranian society, that Islam is the core of their, most of my friends who are Islam identify as Persian. They came out during the revolution. I don't know a lot of Iranians that are newer to the United States than that. So I may have a biased point of view here, but I think that there is sort of a moderation of enforcement that could happen around Islam itself, like we saw in Iran during the Shah, right? It was still a predominantly Muslim nation before 79, I'm guessing, and so, but it was Paris of the Middle East, and so what if this is the first domino in the Reformation period of Islam, right? Islam, just like Christianity was just as brutally enforced as hundreds of years ago as Islam is today. And so I wonder, as societies get more educated, you don't have to turn away from your faith, but the idea that men need to be protected from their nature, which seems to be the heart of a lot of Islam, the early tenets. And I think that idea, so I could see this as like sort of the first domino in women taking back control, asserting their faith, but asserting it the way they believe it and the way they want to practice it. And maybe this is the birth of sort of a modernization, or that's kind of offensive, a reformation of Islam in some of these more stringent sects of Islam.
Terry, to add on that, what you said is this is the first domino, and I most certainly think it is, because the issue has, and just doing some reading on the situation, has gone beyond women protesting. Iranian oil workers are now on strike in support of these anti-government protests. Small business owners have seized operations in support of these anti-government protests.
If you're lucky, you go home to a woman. It could be your mom, it could be your wife, it could be your girlfriend, but if you're lucky, you go home to a woman. So your ass better be out there protesting for her rights. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. Like, once it gains enough momentum, a close friend of mine in grad school is from Egypt. His wife wore a hijab, and was when I came over, it was a formal relationship, and I did my best to respect her and her autonomy in a way where I didn't interact too much with her. I could see that was uncomfortable for her, maybe just me, right? But I know when I left, that hijab came off, and she while I thought my friend she ran that household, right? And so I think that, again, not to step on you there, Andrew, I'm hopeful that the Muslim men of Iran are waking up to the fact that you can still be a devout Muslim and treat women as your equal. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I hope for that too. And I think it's doable. I just think there's issues when you try to base a government off of religion. I think you can be perfectly faithful. But I mean, I don't know for Islam, but I would say religion in general requires a degree of choice. And if you're forcing it on people, whether it is a strict hand of the morality police or something lighter as even social pressure, that kind of takes the choice element out of it, which I think is important. And then also, I mean, they can have a religious state if they want. I just think when you tie in legitimacy to a state to a very strict personal and moral system,
What about Israel?
it's
What
so
about Israel?
wrong.
Well,
I think
Well, they're a
Israel
much
proves
smaller
that you.
state. And
But
there's
they're-
also the whole issue with Palestine.
Okay, well, let's set that aside for a moment. But let's talk about female-male equality in Israel, right? Like, again, I agree with you. Certain religions are barriers to equality, which is necessary in a free society. Full stop. Right? But even the evolution of American Christianity over our, 200 plus years has changed. Right? The way we view women and treat women through women's suffrage, through the movements of the 60s and 70s, right? We had protests like this. I mean, we weren't.
Yeah, but
shooting
America also had a
women.
very strong, like in our system, a separation of church and state. And Iran doesn't have that. And I mean, it does say, in God we trust on the money, but that's a whole other story. It doesn't necessarily refer to a Christian God. And then
That's what we say now. But let's
well,
be honest.
there's a court case on it, and originally it was placed into the whole God thing originally, at least in the Pledge of Allegiance, it was placed in later in the 1950s as a way to like oppose communism, because Eisenhower and other interest groups
Right.
were like, okay, well, we don't want to say all the power comes from the state, so we're just going to say it comes from something above the state, and across cultures, that's just the word God. And so I think that separation, or whatever you want to call it, is important, that America has it. And I think that's why America can tolerate religious difference. There's the whole Christian nationalism issue, but that's something else.
Those
I
two
think
words don't
Ameri-
go together, so that doesn't.
No,
that's
no,
not a thing.
they do not go
That's
together
not
at
a
all.
thing.
No, but some people
Let
wanna
unto
say it is.
Caesar what is Caesar's, right?
Yeah, some people want to
so-
say it is and it's not, but I think the whole principle of founding on separation, a formal separation, but still maintaining a private respect is important for society and a government's function and legitimacy. And to tie them together, I don't know if it is necessarily the best, but that's also
Wouldn't
coming
you-
from a Western perspective, and I don't know, I haven't lived something else, so I could be wrong.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that what you just described is the exception in human history?
Yeah,
I disagree. There's been plenty of religiously tolerant societies pre-America.
well, since like.
For
in the-
instance,
Like since.
The
Spanish-ish,
Moors,
modern
the
age.
Moors in Spain invasion, they were actually one of the most diverse societies in Europe. They had
religiously,
multiple-
religiously,
yeah,
or
religiously
ethnically?
they had both. They had a large Jewish, a large Muslim, and a large Christian society. They were all pretty much very tolerant. A lot of the early Muslim empires were actually extremely tolerant of other religions.
Awesome.
So like I don't think that like it's like a specific to one religion or another. I think that it is possible to have a very religious society and still be tolerant.
But
you
can
know,
it be
so-
institutionalized religion, like a state?
I honestly think it can, because like a lot of these states like implemented laws, like they were very religious institutionally, but still were like implementing some sort of tolerance. So I still think it is possible. I think that these movements though are critical to forcing those tolerant measures to be implemented or put in place.
Were the Moors tolerant of the Christians they conquered?
Yeah, no. Oh no. So when the Christians conquered those Moorish people, like they basically drove everyone out. So that was the beginning of the Inquisition and all that.
Right.
But
Right.
societies were
I'm just messing around.
All right.
So,
All
all
right.
right. Take it away,
So-
Andrew.
So Sarah, I wanted to. Terry kind of already asked it, but I was thinking in my head for a while. So your idea of religion and a state really that are tied together can't really govern properly, I guess, in a free society. Would you argue that Israel has done it right? I mean, the Star of David, of course, is on the flag. They have a big Jewish identity. However, you do see a lot of Western culture in there too. I mean, they do, of course, allow for pride. They do provide for gay rights. I mean, of course, this may be controversial, and some viewers may disagree. But they're Westernized in a sense, the way America and Europe is, where they have a lot of civil liberties. However, they
For
still have a
Jews.
big
For
or
Jews.
Yeah.
for well, even for not even for certain non-Jews. I mean, Tel Aviv is not necessary. I wouldn't say Tel Aviv is necessarily the best city to show the
Tehran?
practice of Judaism.
Okay.
So really, my question is, do you think Israel did it right, where they can have a sort of religious identity while respecting other liberties, or do you think they have it wrong as well?
Personally, I wouldn't want any of it involved, but I'd say I guess they're doing something right. Maybe this could work for Iran, to be honest, because, well, some of the claims about whether the Jews or the Muslims have claim to the land is, some people say it starts, with the British in the 1940s or whatever, but other people say it goes way back to like biblical times, and that the Jewish people have been on that land forever. So I guess they might think they have a right to establish a society there. But they're pretty religious, ethnically cohesive from what I understand. So I guess maybe the history part of where they are in the land, and the fact that,
Right.
I don't know if I want to say this, but some people consider Jewish to be more than just a religion. That binds people together. So I think that could be how it works. Plus, there's a very
Right.
long history of them being in that land. Now, of course, you could say something similar about Iran when you look at how long they've been there.
It's more about the tolerance of modern Judaism, right? Modern
Yeah.
Judaism it's not nearly as rigid as, say, Christianity in the American South or Islam in Iran, right? And so, not equating those two things at all. Rewind that, listen again, not an equivalency. And so, but yeah, no, I think you touched on it too. It's right. Judaism isn't just a religion, right? It's not a race, it's a people. That's how they self-describe, right? It's an identity. But I think it's a good caveat, a good question, Andrew. But I do think how they treat Palestinians is up for grabs, to say no or yes, depending upon how you feel about Israel and Palestine's relationships, and
Right.
the some people believe it's an apartheid state. And so I think that blows up your argument for those people.
All right. Thank you.
So
All right.
this has been an interesting conversation. I like talking about religion. I also like to talk about Audit's piece too.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Audit, take it away. Tell us about your post. You got something in the new Voting Smarter blog, Impartial, Understanding Biden's Marijuana Action. Tell us more about it.
Right. So I did a piece surrounding the new Biden executive action. And so essentially I'll just go into like what exactly he did. So he did a lot of big things. The first thing he said, he was going to plan on descheduling marijuana. So like, if y'all don't know how it works, it's like there's a tier system. Like we have Schedule 5 is like cough drops, right? I go to CVS, I can get cough drops over the counter. Schedule 4, Schedule 3, those are things like I have to get a prescription for. Like, so if you want like a steroid for like your sore throat or something, you got to get a doctor's prescription. You can't just buy it off the counter. And then you've got like Schedule 2 and Schedule 1. These are like banned substances. These are the things like heroin or methamphetamines, or now marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug. So Biden is saying we're going to take Schedule 1 drug, which is marijuana, and we're going to move it. He never said where, so that's kind of annoying, but we're assuming it's going to be probably in that 3 to 4 range, because that's the only way like any of this matters. The second thing he did was also expunge and pardon simple possession. So if you have basically in your entire life possessed marijuana only enough to consume it, and you were arrested on a federal level, you basically had your criminal record, like you were pardoned. So you were released from prison, or like it's gone from your criminal history. But this doesn't, let's say you were arrested in like Texas, and Texas bans marijuana, and you were prosecuted at the state level, that pardon doesn't apply, which is like the third level, which is like Biden is calling on state governors to be like, hey, you need to also pardon marijuana simple possession.
How many people have been?
Yeah.
Tell
So
us the numbers.
the number right now for federal is 6,500. That's federal level, but there are hundreds of thousands of people for non-violent drug offenses on the state level too. So simple possession is such a small aspect of like what you get locked up for.
And it's not really a federal crime, right? Like you're not arresting.
It's really rare.
People with
it's really
like
rare.
Secondary convictions, right? If they rolled up on a group and somebody had weed, that's when they got arrested with these other federal criminals that maybe robbed a bank or robbed a post office, something like that.
Yeah, but like also like if you think about it, since the Obama administration, they have said, the Obama administration, the Trump administration has also kept this rule of like, we will not interfere with prosecuting marijuana on a state level. So for all y'all watching, like marijuana is technically illegal in the United States federally, but states have legalized it. So the issue is like, well, even though the federal government does have the ability to regulate marijuana, the Obama administration is like, we are taking our hands off unless it's an interstate matter. So unless someone traffics drugs across state lines, the federal government's not going to be involved. So I think like those 6,500 cases are probably like someone had a small amount of marijuana and like drove across state lines, or like they were walking across state lines, or
they were in a national park.
Yeah, like they were on federal property and like that happened. So I think it's a very small fraction of the hundreds of thousands of people that are truly impacted by like drug criminalization policies. But I think it is a step in the right direction. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Audit, for that explanation. Moving forward, I get to the discussion, and of course, we're talking about pot, we're talking about marijuana. I think I know where everyone is going to be, but maybe I'm wrong. What are ideas? I mean, should pot be legalized? Should it be decriminalized? Should it stay the way it is? What's everybody's thoughts?
There's always a thing of like banning substances, whether it was alcohol in the early 1900s, or trying to regulate other things like marijuana itself. Like you end up driving a lot of everything underground, and it becomes so difficult to like control it, that if you were able to legalize it, that would be better. I do have sort of like another perspective, but I mean, if everyone wants to jump in on their kind of original thoughts, y'all can go for it.
Okay, I think it'll be pretty clear. Hell yeah, blaze it up. I want to chill up on Mount Washington and smoke a joint while I look at all the beautiful leaves change colors.
Oh man, Snoop D-O double Andrew. Okay, playa.
Terry, what are your views? I know I listened. I know you're a little older. You got kids. I'm not sure, if that impacts, your opinions at all. Let me hear your thoughts.
So I have never used marijuana.
Uh,
You
never inhaled, you mean? Like Mr. Clinton said.
I did not take one hit from that blunt. And so with Miss Lewinsky. So but that would surprise most people, right? Most people in college thought I was high. I think that they need to do more. I think 6,500 people is weak sauce. Look, the going back and looking forward are two different conversations, in my opinion. should the sentences be commuted or should they be pardoned? Maybe there should be some legal ramifications because even though it shouldn't have been illegal, it was illegal, right? Should it be expunged from your record? You know, that's the backwards looking stuff. But moving forward, like they need to legalize marijuana today so banks and businesses and everybody can act like it's a real thing. It's lobbying that's kept it from being legal, right? It's the alcohol lobby, it's the cigarette lobby, in my opinion. Do I want my kids to smoke weed? Not until they're 18 or over, 21 or over. Are they gonna? Probably. You know, if you know, maybe I raise them in a way like I plan on raising them like I was raised, and I was worried, right? The idea of the gateway drug, or I was worried about using drugs. I always wanted to work for the government, and so before 9/11, if that was if I tested positive for drugs, I couldn't have gotten the cool jobs I wanted. It was zero tolerance. But look, no, and legalize it all. Like, we just need to teach people how to take care of themselves, provide them resources, and teach people how to make good decisions. That decision might be to get high. It might not be to get high. Whatever it is, I think Biden. That's why I asked you the number so everybody could hear it on it. It's like 6,500 people, right? 80,000 people are going to die from fentanyl this year, and we're talking about 6,500 people. Like, come on now, let's do some real stuff. Let's not. And this was my other thought, and again, it's me being political. Why'd you wait till now? There's people who've been in jail 18 months, so you could make an announcement a month out from an election. That's effed up. That's effed up. You played with their lives. You waited till now. You want to do this the whole time. You waited till now to score political points, and that's messed up.
Yeah, no, it is. That's also how the game of politics works. I don't think many young people are really going to read too into that. I mean, at least the average ones, as far as the action goes, I don't care. There's risks associated with smoking marijuana as there are cigarettes and alcohol. Cigarettes are legal and far, far, far more dangerous than marijuana. They're highly taxed, albeit, but I mean, if that one's legal, why is marijuana not? I mean, you can just, if you don't want to do it, you can just choose not to do it. Being high doesn't, like on marijuana, it doesn't make you act violent like if you're on meth. It's not as addictive and easy to overdose as like heroin or cocaine. So, I mean, if you personally don't want to do it.
Or
that's fine.
opioids.
Yeah, so I mean, if you personally don't want to smoke marijuana, them legalizing it is not forcing you to do anything. You can choose not to. You can choose not to associate with those people that do it. I think it's fine.
I think one of the biggest fears that I've had about like legalization, and like why I've kind of been like some pretty strong counter argument I've kind of come up with is like we've witnessed as a society what big pharma has done to drugs. They've taken what we've known as like simple painkillers and made them super, super addictive, and like Oxycontin or Valium or Xanax. Like, I'm afraid that like they would take what marijuana is, which is something that is very low addiction rates, very low potency, something that does have benefits, and they would utilize their resources, their lobbying efforts to create a version of marijuana that's potentially harmful for profit motives. And I'm fearing that I don't want to see that happen. So if it just wasn't allowed, big pharma couldn't capitalize on it.
Well, maybe because Terry's the oldest of us, but he also said he didn't like smoke it, but he probably can answer this, I guess. Isn't the weed that's like around today far stronger than like when you were? And plus I've heard stories about how there's like fentanyl starting to be released in it. So I mean, if your concern is it just getting stronger, if it goes to big pharma, that's already happening. And I mean, alcohol is technically a drug. It has nothing to do with big pharma. Now, sure,
So-
depending on how they schedule it, it might go that way, but I don't know. particular.
To answer your
counterargument.
question, the potency of THC is much higher today than it was in the hippies
Oh, yeah.
movement
Yeah,
of the 60s. The counter argument to Audit's point is, well, instead of regulating citizens, regulate big pharma. And the problem is that's a lot harder, right?
Yeah.
The whole reason voting smarter exists is because regular citizens don't matter, right? Our vote doesn't matter. At least that's how it feels. And so that's why we've built what we've built. That's why we're fundraising for what we're fundraising. That's why we're here tonight. And so Big Pharma's won the debate. I mean, they're not in jail, right? Like, how many times did El Chapo have to sneak out of jail? And they're basically doing the same thing. And so, but yeah, I think the naive person in me, yeah, and I've been around plenty of people smoking. It's, but the naive person in me says, well, if you're going to regulate somebody, regulate the producers to, maybe you regulate the level of THC or addictiveness, just like cigarettes or alcohol is regulated, right? Remember, we couldn't buy absinthe in here in America for a very long time because wormwood's going to make you go crazy, right? And so I don't know. Again, addiction is biological. Abuse of substance is sometimes caused by addiction, but it's also caused by stuff going on in your life. I drank a crap ton during the pandemic. Way too much, right? I probably should have been using weed instead of drinking bourbon to get over, but then it would have made me more paranoid, right? So I think that we keep talking about symptoms of what's broken in our society and not the causes. I think right now the way marijuana is, it could be legalized and regulated in a way to prevent addiction or overpotency that you're concerned about. And we could, and if we see a huge uptake in abuse, then that's emblematic of something else that's wrong with us. It's not that weed's not the problem. It's the way we treat mental illness, the way we treat each other, the way we treat ourselves, that's the problem.
To answer the question of some people had, getting it legalized, or were you afraid of, what we're going to see with fentanyl being laced into it and among other things? Well, I mean, it's still, maybe statewide legal, but I mean, it's still illegal, at least federally, and still a lot of countries in the world. I believe Mexico still has it illegal. I believe, where of course is where a lot of the drugs come from, or at least start on their way up to America. But the legalization of it, or other drugs for that matter, at least how I see in Massachusetts, they're typically being sold in typically local shops, and in reality in high income areas by reputable businesses. Whether you're regulated or not, no reputable business is going to try to kill their customers. They're not going to put fentanyl in their
2
marijuana.
words: Philip Morris. Like, it's just how quick they don't want to kill you today. That's the difference, right? They're not going to kill you so you can't come back, right? McDonald's, right? Nestle, Philip Morris, they're all killing us, but it's the slow burn.
Yeah.
So, okay, fair enough. Well, I don't know if you guys know this,
Okay.
but I know Philip Morris is sitting on billions in cash and billions of dollars in land, waiting for it to get federally legalized. All those mom and pop shops and growers, they're going to be out of business within the first 48 months, as soon as it's legalized. Big growers are going to win. They're going to drive down prices. It's going to be more accessible. The market's going to take over. And so Audit's right. The market power is going to go to those with power. That's how it works in our kleptocracy. And so it's a real concern, but they're just going to displace the revenue of Anheuser-Busch. It's a different. So I don't know.
I know that I think there's already big pharma companies buying marijuana like plants right now. They're building already the infrastructure. They know it's coming. We know it's coming. That federal, at least descheduling is a possibility, which means that it's fair game. I just think that like we've seen what, I don't know, like vapes have done to like tobacco companies have used vapes to like infiltrate a market that shouldn't have been possible to infiltrate, right? Like teenagers. And I'm just worried that like I'm not worried about marijuana itself, because I think there's a ton of literature that pretty much suggests that if you're using marijuana responsibly in the form that it's made to be used in, you're not going to run into many issues. But I fear that like if you have big pharma at really controlling a lot of the supply, that they get to kind of dictate what goes in it, and they get to market it to people who are kind of vulnerable to drug use. And I don't know, like we've seen it happen before, and the government's
It's
often
fair.
decades. They're
It's
often
very
decades late to
fair.
respond.
And a
Right.
very credible fear, very reasonable concern. And again, it speaks to what's broken in our system.
Terry, I know you when you mentioned something good, about voting smarter, about how the reason why we're here is to give people their power back. I think one people need to realize, we the people are the economy. That's why we have the browser extension on Google, so we as individuals can take that power back and decide, okay, marijuana, let's say marijuana moves forward. We're going to of course see this big push. We're going to see a lot more local shops open up. We're going to see a lot more big businesses try to take it up. No, that's where we as people have a responsibility to keep an eye on idea of that, because guess what, the way these companies get power is through our dollars. We need to be, and we as people need to be a lot more, take a much closer look at who we give money to, whether it be to big pharmaceutical companies or even those local shops. The only reason why those local marijuana shops can get that power is if we let them. Yeah, are they probably going to get marijuana at a lower price? Sure, they probably will. They're probably going to have a lower price than the local shop on Main Street. There's no doubt about that. They can do that, but spend the extra 10, spend the extra $15 if you can. And this isn't just for marijuana, but this is for any business. If you spend a little bit of extra money at your local business, the people who are actually in your community spend that extra money compared to somewhere like a big company, I think the world's going to be a much better place.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the shameless plug. I think that what you're saying is right, and what Audit's saying is equally right. We have a lot of what are called collective action problems in the world and in the United States, whether it's the environment, degradation of our communities from drugs or violence, crime, or disparities in education. The truth is, a lot of us look to our government to solve these problems. We've all been, very few of us lived during times where government did not have a large role in the American life. And so I think that we've taken this idea of a collective, right? These collective action problems where each one of us keep drinking out of plastic straws because they're way better than paper straws. Paper straws are bullshit. Okay. And so each one of us drink out of plastic straws thinking, well, if it's just me, it's just a couple straws, right? And then it's billions of dead turtles, right? Or polar bears have started snorting Coke off each other with these straws. I don't know if you saw this on InfoWars, but the deal is we got to come back together. We've been divided and become insular, whether it's our government, our media, our phones, right? And so what we're trying to do here at Voting Smarter is we make information cheap. We try and give you little pieces of your power back. And what we're building now is a collective. We're building a collective of people with very different views. And where those views overlap, they create the change they want to see in the world. The wisdom of the crowd prevails over the wisdom of the wealthy. And look, we hope to be wealthy, but we don't want to take your power. And so, you know, we think that it's going to take a collective to solve these collective action problems. And I don't mean a collective like Maduro means a collective, right? I mean a group of people who recognize a similar problem, and we all have individual solutions. So stay tuned. We're building spaces for us to have these conversations. We're building spaces where you get to interact with your politicians like you paid a high paid lobbyists to get access to them. That's what we're doing behind the scenes, right? We're trying to help you get that power back. And Andrew's right. Right now, you can do it by going to the Chrome store, downloading our extension, finding the companies that donate to politicians using your money, and make sure those companies are donating them to the politicians you like. Right? If you're going to buy some deodorant, buy it from Walmart or Target, whichever one's going to use, a few cents of that transaction to buy a politician. You're buying politicians when you buy deodorant. They're just not your politician. I mean, look, we've talked about freedom in Iran. We've talked about freedom in the United States. And what we're trying to do is give you freedom of choice and give you freedom in your government, right? In 2020, we helped you find people based on issues, people to vote for based on issues, not party name, right? That's going to continue. And so, this has been a great, as Andrew put it pre-meeting, I bet this is going to be a blazing conversation, and it has been. I think that we've covered some sticky, icky issues, but we've definitely had a great combo, and I really appreciate all of your guys' perspective and your different ideas. So thanks for this, and definitely tune in next time, a couple weeks from now, everybody, when we have more of these conversations. Who knows what's going to be on fire next week?
Absolutely. Again, thank you tonight. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of everyone here at Pocket Politics and Voting Smarter, thank you for listening. Catch us again in about 2 weeks. We're going to have another great set of discussions. And don't forget, check out Impartial, the Voting Smarter blog on www.votingsmartersocial.medium.com. See you guys all soon.